Hello, welcome to the Self Learning Platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 7, John Locke. Let us have introduction about the unit. A profound and extensive study of John Locke has been one of the most remarkable achievements of recent philosophical scholarship. Perhaps no other political thinker except his great senior contemporary Thomas Hobbes has received greater attention at the hands of historians of thought within the last 50 years or so than the author of the two treatises of government and an essay concerning human understanding. The discovery of a wealth of new material in Lovelace's collection and a large number of critical commentaries based on it have vastly added to our knowledge about the Locke's life and thought. And yet, curiously enough, there is today a greater divergence of opinion about the real spirit or the hidden meaning of Locke's political theory than ever before. A beginner is almost sure to be lost in a maze of motley interpretations from Straussian esotericism, claiming for Locke a thoroughgoing hobbyism, a consistently egoistic and utilitarian ethics, to a deontological view of Locke's ethic put forth by Raymond Paulin, representing him as a classical natural law thinker from Wagon's characterization of Locke as a prince of individualistic to Kendall's interpretation of him as a collectivist of Rousseau's brand, from liberal constitutionalism of Locke in Martin Selig's analysis to Macpherson's exposition of it as a theory of capitalist appropriation and the dictatorship of bourgeoisie. Perhaps there is some truth in each of these interpretations, but when Locke's philosophy is subjected to a Prochristine technique of interpretation and is made to conform to a particular philosophical label, it suffers heavily distortion and losses not only its richness and catholicity, but also its identity. The paradoxical situation which thus emerges is best illustrated by comparing Tyler Warrender's Hobbes as a deontological proto-Kantian moralist and a philosopher of natural law and divine command theory, with Locke as interpreted by Leo Strauss and Richard Cox as a perfect psychological egoist and ethical relativist or covert hobbyist. This has been ironically described by J. W. W. Watkins in these words. This situation is painful for examination candidates liable to be asked to compare and contrast Hobbes and Locke. So, let us all agree to the following compromise. Hobbes was a moralistic natural lawyer in Hooker's tradition, while Locke preached a mixture of egoism, fear, and authority. And Locke wrote the second treatise, which Hobbes wrote Leviathan. Now, life and work of John Locke. Locke's life 1632 to 1704 coincided with one of the most significant epochs of British history that saw the transformation of absolute monarchy into parliamentary democracy. It was a period of glorious resolution of 1689, with which Locke was closely associated with Lord Ashley, the first Earl of Shaftesbury, Locke's friend and patron, who was charged with conspiracy to exclude Charles II from acceding to the throne. Locke, suspecting prosecution, went into voluntary exile in Holland and remained there till the final overthrow of the Strauss despotism in 1689. He welcomed William of Orange as the great restorer and lawful ruler. Locke punished his two treaties of government in 1690. The same year saw the publication of his famous philosophical work, the Essay Concerning Human Understanding. Locke's other important writings were Letters Concerning Toleration, 1689, 1690, and 1692, and Some Thoughts Concerning Education in 1693. Locke's early essay on the law of nature was published with an English translation by W. Vaughan Layden in 1959. The two treatises of government consist of two parts. The first is the refutation of Filmer's, and the second, the more important of the two, is an inquiry into the true, original, extent, and end of civil government. The work was ostensibly written to justify the glorious revolution, to establish the throne of our great restorer, our present King William, to make good his title in the consent of the people, which being the only one of all lawful governments, he has more fully and clearly than any prince in Christendom, and to justify to the world the people of England, who love of their just and natural rights, with their resolution to preserve them, saved the nation when it was on the very brink of slavery and ruin. This historical linkage has been challenged by modern scholars. Peter Laslett has argued that the second treatise was written at least as early as 1681, and that it was written first, and Locke later added the first to it. The first treatise is not generally considered to be of great philosophical importance. The ideas of Filmer vis-a-vis Locke has been another subject of controversy. All scholars do not agree with Laslett's regarding the date and order of composition of the two treatises. Richard Ashcraft and John Donne have discussed these questions in detail. We may set aside this historical controversy for our present purpose and pass on to more theoretical issues. Now we are going to discuss some philosophical problems. The first and foremost controversy about the philosophical foundation of Locke's political theory relates to the alleged conflict or flat contradiction between his imperialist theory of knowledge as expounded in his essay concerning human understanding and the rationalist view of natural law adumbrated in the second treatise of civil government as the cornerstone of his political theory. Critics like C. E. Wagon, George H. Sabine, and Peter Laslett have argued that the notion of natural law cannot be reconciled with the overall empiricism of Locke, which shows itself in his criticism of innate ideas and his theory of origin of knowledge in sense experience and reflection. But a careful analysis of Locke's epistemology leads to the conclusion that the blanket label empiricist is not properly applicable to Locke, and his theory contains important rationalist elements. He expressly says that his criticism of innate ideas should not be understood to imply the rejection of natural law. Moreover, only sense experience cannot provide us with certain knowledge that is knowledge in the true sense, without the creative participation of mind. His theory of knowledge, at least in its broad perspective and aim, closely resembles the critical philosophy of Kant, and it has to be clearly distinguished from the atomistic sensationalism of the British empiricists who followed him. Another element of Locke's theory which is supposed to impair the coherence and integrity of his notion of natural law and its intuitionist overtone is his psychological hedonism. To be sure, a hedonistic motivation to morality cannot be denied in Locke, but it must be remembered that though he defines good and evil in terms of pleasure and pain, these are to him only consequences of a morally right action. They do not constitute its essence. A moral law is eternal and universal, and it is obligatory independently of its pleasurable consequences. Utility, says Locke, is not the basis of law or the ground of obligation, but the consequence of obedience to it. Locke's moral theory, therefore, is essentially a deontological rather than utilitarian and consequentialist. In legal theory, similarly, he is more of an intellectualist than a voluntarist. There is therefore no conflict between natural law postulated in the second treatise and the ethical and epistemological theory of the essay. Locke is a consistent natural law theorist. Now we want to wind up this lecture and thank you so much for your attention.